There are women you forget before you get home. And then there are women who enter your life for 10 minutes and leave you changed in ways you cannot explain without sounding a little insane. Dr. Sarah Vale was the second kind. Nia Hart did not know her name the night she kissed her. If she had, maybe she would have been more careful. Then again, maybe not. Because there was nothing about that woman that made caution easy. Still remember me? I'm your virtual girlfriend. I'm so glad you're here, truly. Before we begin, maybe give me a little love name, something sweet, something only you would call me. That way, whenever I hear it again, I'll know it's you. Now put on your earphones, get comfortable, and settle in. And tell me where you're listening from today. Are you in your room, your living room, stuck in traffic, hiding in the parking lot, or just lying there pretending you're asleep? I love imagining where you are while I tell you these stories. If this story keeps you company, hit that subscribe button so I can keep coming back to you with more. Alright then, let me tell you a story. It was a Saturday night, and Nia had only gone out because her best friend, Tammy, refused to let final year turn her into a tragic academic cliché. Tammy had said if Nia spent one more weekend buried under research articles, she would graduate with honors and no actual memories. So Nia agreed to one night out. Just one. No expectations. Just a crowded bar, low light, and the kind of careless atmosphere that makes people believe they are capable of being anyone for a few hours. At first, it worked. Nia laughed, let Tammy drag her into conversations she didn't care about, and even considered, for a brief and deeply embarrassing second, letting a girl in silver eyeliner flirt with her near the restrooms. Then she saw her. Not in a cinematic entrance. Not across the room like fate had arranged the angle. Just at the bar. Standing alone. And somehow that was more devastating. The woman had one hand around a glass, the other resting lightly against the polished counter. She wore solitude naturally. Like she had long ago accepted that being beautiful drew company, but being herself kept most of it from staying. She was dressed simply, but there are women who do not need help from clothes. Dark hair. Perfect posture. A face so composed it almost offended the eye. And people noticed. Everyone noticed. The woman ignored all of it with frightening grace. Not dismissive, not flattered. Just untouched. As if being wanted had become weather. Tammy saw where Nia's attention had gone and gave a quiet laugh. "Oh no," she said. "What?" Nia asked, not looking away. "That face," Tammy replied. "The face you make right before making a bad decision." Nia tried to laugh it off, but Tammy was right. Because something about the woman had gone straight past curiosity and lodged itself somewhere more dangerous. She didn't look available. She looked like she had loved someone recently. And maybe lost them. That was what made Nia move. Not just beauty. Not just mystery. Damage. The beautiful kind. A few minutes later, Nia found herself sliding onto the empty stool beside her. Up close, she was worse. More beautiful. More composed. More impossible. Her eyes were dark, clear, and alert in a way that made Nia feel examined before she had even spoken. The woman looked at her. No smile. Just one long, measured glance. "You're staring," the woman said, her voice low and smooth. Nia should have been embarrassed. Instead, she smiled. "So are you." For one second, something flashed in the woman's eyes. Amusement, maybe. Or approval. It was enough. Nia leaned one elbow on the bar. "Bad night?" The woman looked down at her drink. Bad enough. That should have been the end. It wasn't. Because Nia heard something in the answer, not invitation, but a tired kind of honesty. "I'd offer to make it better," Nia said, "but that sounds like pressure." The woman looked at her then, properly. And this time there was no doubt about the amusement. "You think you could make it better?" "No," Nia said honestly. "But I think I could distract you for a few minutes." That did it. The woman smiled. It was small. It was brief. It ruined everything. They talked after that. Not deeply. Just enough for the air to change. And then there was a moment when two people stopped talking, and neither wants to be the first one to name what has entered the space between them. The woman's gaze dropped to Nia's mouth. Nia noticed. And didn't move. That was the permission. The woman leaned in first. The kiss was not hesitant or accidental. It was reckless. Full. Immediate. The kind of kiss that feels like it had been waiting in one of them before the other arrived. Nia's hand went to the back of her neck before she could think better of it. The woman kissed like restraint had already failed her long before this moment. There was hunger there, but also relief. The room disappeared. The music disappeared. Everything except the pressure of her mouth and the terrible realization that this stranger already felt too memorable. When they finally pulled apart, they stayed too close, breathing the same air. For one impossible second, Nia thought the woman would say something real. Instead, she stepped back. The careful, composed expression returned to her face. "This was a mistake," she said quietly. Her voice didn't sound regretful. It sounded frightened by how much she had liked it. Before Nia could answer, the woman picked up her bag. No name, no number, no promise. Just one last look that felt too direct to be meaningless. Then she was gone. Tammy returned seconds later, eyes wide. "Tell me that was not your mouth on a stranger." Nia was still staring at the doorway. "It was." Tammy grabbed her arm. "Did you get her name?" Nia shook her head. "No." "Her number?" "No." Tammy groaned. You could not make out with the hottest woman in the city and let her leave unidentified. But Nia barely heard her. Because she was still trapped in that kiss. Still replaying it. Still wondering why a woman would kiss like that and leave like she was running from a fire she started herself. Monday morning arrived with all the mercy of a knife. Nia walked into the lecture hall with coffee in one hand and 2 sleepless nights behind her. She told herself the bar woman was done. A story. Nothing more. The course, Modern Ethics and Public Reasoning, was supposed to be taught by old Professor Albright for the final semester. But about a week ago, an email had gone out announcing his sudden medical leave. His replacement was a Drive S. Vale, a name Nia had seen on the updated syllabus, but hadn't bothered to look up. In her final year, a professor was just a name on a schedule. She sat in her usual seat, 3rd row, slightly left, and tried to pull herself together. Students were filtering in. Ordinary. Everything felt ordinary. Until the lecture hall door opened. And the woman from the bar walked in. As the professor. Dr. Sarah Vale entered the room carrying a stack of papers and the kind of composure that should have been illegal on a Monday morning. Nia forgot how to breathe. The woman she had kissed was crossing to the front of her lecture hall like she had always belonged there. And apparently, she had. Nia's first thought should have been panic. Instead, it was worse. It was, she's even more beautiful here. Sarah set the papers down, looked up, and let her gaze pass over the room. It moved row by row with calm efficiency. Then it reached Nia. And paused. Only for a fraction of a second. Only enough. Nia knew instantly she had been recognized. Internally, Sarah's mind went into a state of controlled freefall. Her. The girl from the bar. Here. She felt a cold dread mix with a hot, inappropriate flicker of something she refused to name. She had no idea what her name was. She was just a face in a sea of faces, a face that knew what her mouth tasted like. "Good morning," Sarah said, her voice the same low, impossible voice from Saturday night. Her professionalism was a shield, and she gripped it tightly. "For those of you who only saw the email, my name is Dr. Vale. I will be taking over this course from Professor Albright for the remainder of the semester." The lecture began. Ethics. Boundaries. Institutional trust. The irony nearly killed Nia. Sarah taught beautifully. That was the first real problem. She was brilliant. Clear without simplifying, sharp without showing off. And students watched her the way people watch women they know they are not good enough for. The boys did it openly. A few girls were more discreet. Even in a lecture hall, Sarah attracted attention the way flame attracts hands that have already been warned. And the wildest part was that she seemed almost oblivious. Not because she truly didn't know. Because she was so practiced at not feeding attention that it looked effortless. She noticed everything. Nia realized that quickly. The longer she watched, the more she understood it. Sarah noticed the guy who leaned forward too much whenever she passed the front row. She noticed the girl who overlaughed at one dry remark. She noticed the cluster of admiration that followed her around campus like static. And she ignored all of it with terrifying grace, which made Nia's own staring feel unbearable, because she could not stop. Every time Sarah turned to write something, every time she lifted her head and let silence settle before speaking again, every time her sleeve shifted at the wrist, it was humiliating. And worse, Sarah knew. Halfway through the lecture, Sarah asked a question. The room went quiet. Silence answered. Nia raised her hand without thinking. Not because she had been following every word. Because she needed to be acknowledged by her. Just once. Sarah looked at her. Really looked. And something in her face shifted, just slightly, just enough to say she had noticed the gesture, the need behind it, the fact that Nia had not raised her hand to answer so much as to be seen. Sarah let the silence stretch one beat too long, then nodded once. One student tried an answer. Wrong. Another student offered a better one. Sarah corrected them both without changing her expression. The lecture kept moving. But Nia had already crossed some invisible line just by putting her hand up. And Sarah had noticed that too. By the time the lecture ended, Nia's notes were a mess. Students started packing up. Nia stayed seated a little longer than she needed to, pretending to rearrange papers she hadn't really been reading. At the front, Sarah was gathering her materials with the same maddening calm. For one wild moment, Nia thought about going down there. She didn't. She just stood slowly, shouldered her bag, and started toward the aisle. Then Sarah spoke. Before you go, she said, her voice still calm, still professional. What's your name? Nia stopped. That question felt more dangerous than any line she could have predicted. She turned. Sarah's expression was unreadable, but her posture had shifted just enough to show that this mattered to her. Nia, she said. Then, because there was no point pretending otherwise, she added, Nia Hart. Sarah gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, like she was putting the memory in order. Miss Hart, she said, and now the name sat properly between them, earned and real. Nia's pulse jumped. Sarah glanced down at her papers, then back up. Your expression suggests you have a question, she said. Professional tone. Nothing else. Nia's heart stumbled. She stepped closer, but not too close. The distance between them had suddenly become meaningful. I do, Nia said. Sarah waited. No impatience. No invitation either. Just that terrifying patience of someone who already knows more than they plan to say. Nia lifted her chin slightly. How did you know it was me? There it was. Truth stripped clean. The room around them felt suddenly too quiet. Sarah's fingers rested against the top sheet of the papers she was holding. For 1 second, the professor's expression changed. Not enough to call softness, but enough to suggest memory. When she answered, her voice was lower than before. Because, she said, meeting Nia's eyes fully, I pay attention. No denial. No apology. No explanation. Just a sentence that carried far more than it gave. Nia stood there, pulse rising, every thought in her rearranging itself around one devastating fact. Dr. Sarah Vale had recognized her immediately. And she had just admitted it. After that first Monday, Nia stopped pretending the kiss had been a strange little accident she could laugh about someday. It had become something else now. A problem. A fixation. A private disaster with a beautiful face and perfect posture. Because once Dr. Sarah Vale looked her in the eye and said, because I pay attention, there was no going back to harmless. Now Nia knew 2 things for certain. First, Sarah remembered. Second, Sarah had chosen not to flinch. And that second part did more damage than the kiss itself. Because anyone could lose control in a bar after a bad breakup. That was human. But walking into a lecture hall 2 days later, seeing the woman you had kissed sitting in the 3rd row, and still delivering an entire ethics lecture without letting your voice crack, that was terrifying. That was power. And unfortunately for Nia, power looked very good on Sarah Vale. The week after that first class should have been survivable. It wasn't. Nia still sat in the 3rd row. Still slightly left. Still with the best angle to the podium. And every lecture became its own form of humiliation. Not because Sarah was cruel. Because she wasn't. Cruel would have been easier. Cruel would have made anger possible. Sarah was worse than cruel. She was controlled. She never embarrassed Nia publicly. Never looked at her too long. Never acknowledged the thing burning under the surface of every interaction. She just taught. Beautifully. Perfectly. And somehow that made everything worse. Because the more Nia watched her, the more impossible she became. It wasn't just the face. Though yes, the face was a problem. It wasn't just the body either, though Nia would have liked to sue whatever higher power had decided to give one woman that much elegance for free. It was the totality of her. The way she held silence without rushing to fill it. The way she wrote on the board with one hand and kept the whole room with her without trying. The way she could shut down attention without ever looking rude. Male students flirted in obvious, embarrassing ways. Female students were often subtler, but not by much. Even some of the younger faculty had a way of lingering around her office door too long, smiling too brightly when she passed. And Sarah noticed all of it. Nia knew she did. She noticed the men who thought charm could make her reconsider being gay. She noticed the women who looked at her like she was a dare they would gladly lose sleep over. She noticed admiration, attraction, projection, all the usual things beautiful women get handed against their will. And she refused to feed any of it. There was no smugness in her. No performance. She moved through attention with the terrifying confidence of someone who had learned long ago not to reward it. Which made Nia feel ridiculous. Because Nia was not subtle. Or at least, she had once believed she was. Now she knew better. The first few lectures after Monday, she tried to act normal. She really did. She took notes. She looked at her notebook. She even timed her glances so they would not seem obvious. It didn't matter. Her body betrayed her. Her eyes found Sarah constantly. Whenever she turned to write something. Whenever she walked down one side of the room. Whenever she leaned one hand on the desk and looked up, letting silence settle over the class before speaking. And every single time, Nia had the unbearable feeling that Sarah knew. Not guessed. Knew. It started to hurt in stupid ways. Seeing her smile faintly at another student's intelligent answer. Hearing another girl ask a question after class and getting 3 extra minutes of Sarah's attention. Watching a male student hover too long by the podium like persistence alone might one day make him special. None of it should have mattered. It mattered anyway. Because obsession is humiliating like that. It turns ordinary things into tiny injuries. And Nia was bleeding quietly from all of them. By the second week, even Tammy had noticed. They were sitting outside on a bench between classes when Tammy closed her notebook and stared at her. "You are getting worse," she said. Nia looked up. "What?" "With the professor thing." "There is no professor thing." Tammy let out a dry laugh. "Nia." Nia looked away. Tammy leaned back, studying her. "You've had a crush before." "This is not a crush. This is you looking like someone stole your sleep and replaced it with a lecture schedule." Nia tried to smile. It didn't hold. "She kissed me," she said quietly, and even now the memory of it altered her breathing. And then she stood there on Monday like nothing happened. Tammy's expression softened just a little. "That's rough. That's not even the worst part." "What's the worst part?" Nia stared down at her hands. "The worst part is that she remembered," she said. She remembered, and she still acted like she had herself under control. "Do you know how awful that is?" Tammy looked like she did, unfortunately, know exactly how awful that was. "She's your professor now," she said carefully. "I know. So this ends badly." "I know. And yet?" Nia laughed once, bitter and tired. "And yet?" That was the problem in its purest form. "And yet?" Knowing something would destroy you doesn't always stop the wanting. Sometimes it just makes the wanting meaner. Sarah, for her part, had not expected the girl from the bar to become a problem she carried into every lecture. She had expected discomfort. She had expected guilt. She had expected the private irritation of having made one reckless choice and then being forced to face its consequences twice a week. What she had not expected was Nia. Not the actual version of her. Not the intensity of her gaze. Not the way she seemed to fill silence without speaking. And not the impossible awareness that came every time Sarah stepped into that room and knew exactly where in the third row she would be. Sarah told herself it was manageable. She had rules. She had control. She had spent years constructing a professional self that no student, colleague, or ex-girlfriend could destabilize. Then Nia started staring in ways no one else in the room could possibly mistake for academic attention. The first time Sarah caught it, she ignored it. The second time, she redirected herself toward another student and kept going. The third time, it became impossible not to recognize the truth. Nia was not just remembering the kiss. She was living inside it. And worse, some shamefully buried part of Sarah liked being looked at that way. Not because she lacked attention elsewhere. God knew attention had never been in short supply. But because Nia's attention was not casual. It wasn't vanity-driven. It wasn't flirtation for sport. It was helpless. And there is something dangerous about being wanted by someone who isn't pretending. That was exactly why Sarah knew she had to stop it. Before it grew teeth. The moment came on a Thursday. The lecture itself had gone smoothly enough. Public morality. Private compromise. The cost of wanting things that do not belong to you. Again, the irony was almost insulting. Nia had been quiet the entire time. Too quiet. No raised hand. No interruptions. No brave little attempts to be noticed. But the staring had not improved. If anything, it had deepened. Sarah felt it like heat. A line of attention dragging over her every time she moved. By the end of class, she had made up her mind. Students began packing their bags. Chairs scraped. Voices rose. Sarah kept her marker, gathered a few papers, then said calmly, "Miss Hart, stay behind for a moment." The room changed instantly. Not dramatically, but enough. A few heads turned. Nia froze halfway through, slipping her notebook into her bag. Tammy, who had been collecting her own things 2 rows over, looked from Sarah to Nia with the exact expression of someone watching a car roll slowly toward a cliff. Nia sat back down. Students filed out. The room emptied. The silence left behind was not comfortable. Sarah stayed by the desk for a moment, creating distance on purpose. Letting the door click shut behind the last student. Letting the air become private enough for honesty and still public enough for caution. Then she looked at Nia. Not as a lecturer scanning a classroom. As a woman who had run out of reasons to avoid what was obvious. "Do you even pay attention in my class?" Sarah asked. The question landed harder than Nia expected. Because it wasn't cruel. It was too calm to be cruel. Nia blinked. "What?" Sarah stepped around the desk slowly. "Do you pay attention?" she repeated, "or do you just stare at me until the hour is over?" The bluntness of it sent heat into Nia's face. For a second, she forgot how to breathe. Sarah's expression did not change. That made it worse. Nia swallowed. "I do pay attention." Sarah tilted her head slightly. "Do you?" The room seemed suddenly too bright. Nia looked away first. Because this was the danger of women like Sarah Vale. They could ask a simple question and make it feel like confession. "I try to," Nia said quietly. Sarah watched her for a beat. Then, lower now, "You look at me in ways that are not appropriate for this room." There it was. Not accusation. Not flirtation. Just truth. And somehow truth, in Sarah's mouth, hurt more than it should have. Nia laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "You noticed." Sarah's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Yes," she said. "I noticed." For a second, neither moved. Nia had imagined this moment too many times. In those imaginings, Sarah might deny the kiss. Or pretend not to remember it. Or worse, act like it had meant absolutely nothing. What Nia had not prepared for was this version of her. Direct. Controlled. Terrifyingly honest. So she asked the question that had been living in her all week. "Do you remember the bar?" The room went still. Sarah didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked tired. "Yes," she said. No hesitation. No softening. Just yes. That one word did more damage than denial ever could. Nia's throat tightened. "So it was me." Sarah held her gaze. "Yes." Nia laughed again, this time because she didn't know what else to do with the hurt suddenly pressing at the back of her ribs. "I thought maybe you'd lie." Sarah's face shifted then. Not enough to call regret. Enough to call sincerity. "I considered it," she said. "But I don't think lying would help either of us." Nia hated that she respected that. She hated more that it made her want to hear the rest. Sarah's next words came slower. "What happened at the bar should not have happened," she said. "If I had known you were my student, it wouldn't have." And there it was. The sentence Nia would go home and replay 100 times. Not because it was cruel, because it wasn't. Because underneath the boundary was the truth she did not know what to do with. Sarah had not said she regretted the kiss. She had said she would have stopped it. For reasons bigger than wanting. That distinction should not have mattered. It mattered catastrophically. Because it left room. And room is the cruelest thing to give a person already halfway in love. Nia looked at her and wished, for one humiliating second, that Sarah had just lied. Just said she didn't remember. Just said it was nothing. That would have been cleaner. Instead, this woman stood in front of her and offered honesty with restraint wrapped around it so tightly it became unbearable. "That's worse," Nia said softly. Sarah's eyes changed at that. Just for a second. A flicker. "What is?" "The truth." Silence stretched between them. Sarah didn't rush to fill it. She rarely rushed anything. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before. "You need to be careful, Nia." The use of her first name felt like a hand closing somewhere around Nia's pulse. "With what?" Nia asked, though she already knew. Sarah held her gaze. "With where you let your attention go." The lecture hall suddenly felt too small for both of them. Nia knew she should nod. Should apologize. Should leave before she said something reckless enough to ruin everything properly. Instead, she asked, "And where does yours go?" That question did it. For the first time since the conversation began, Sarah looked caught off balance. Only slightly. Only enough for someone paying absurdly close attention to notice. Nia noticed. Of course she did. Sarah's mouth parted, then closed again. When she answered, her voice had gone cool once more. "That will be all." And just like that, the wall was back. Nia stood there for 1 second too long. Then she picked up her bag and left. That night, she lay on her bed replaying every second of it. The confrontation. The honesty. The sentence that hurt worse than any rejection could have. "If I had known you were my student, it wouldn't have happened." She should have taken it as closure. She should have taken it as warning. Instead, her stupid heart kept circling the one part that destroyed her most. Sarah remembered. Sarah had noticed. Sarah had told the truth. And somewhere beneath all that control, beneath the ethics and the caution and the impossible elegance, Nia had seen the tiniest crack. Enough to make obsession feel less like fantasy and more like a wound. And from that night on, wanting Sarah Vale stopped feeling romantic. It started feeling inevitable. By the time Thursday came around, Nia had stopped pretending the conversation in the lecture hall had settled anything. If anything, it had made the silence worse. Before that day, there had still been room for confusion. For denial. For the dangerous little hope that maybe Sarah Vale had looked at her in the bar and felt nothing she couldn't walk away from. But after that lecture hall conversation, there was no room left for that kind of mercy. Sarah had remembered. Sarah had admitted it. And she had done something far more dangerous than lying. She had told the truth without giving Nia anything to hold on to. That kind of honesty was cruel in a way Nia had not expected. Because it left her with no clean ending. Only an open wound. The problem with an open wound is that it does not stay private for long. It starts affecting everything. Nia noticed it in the smallest ways first. The way she checked the lecture hall door before class now, as if she had begun arriving early for no reason other than to make sure she was seated before Sarah entered. The way she stopped trying to make eye contact with anyone else when Sarah was speaking. The way Tammy had to repeat herself twice during lunch because Nia was too busy replaying one sentence from the lecture hall to hear anything else. Because I pay attention. That sentence had become a kind of echo in her head. It followed her through the day. It sat beside her in the library. It hovered over her shoulder in the cafeteria. It made every ordinary thing feel unstable. And then there was Sarah. Sarah, who kept teaching like nothing had happened. Sarah, who kept her composure so completely that it was almost offensive. She was still stunning in that unbothered, impossible way that made people look twice without meaning to. Men did it. Women did it. Even some of the younger lecturers did it when they thought no one was watching. A man from the philosophy department had tried to keep her after a faculty meeting long enough to ask if she was free for coffee. A woman from another faculty had complimented her with that too soft tone people use when they are pretending their interest is professional. Sarah had dismissed both with the same calm efficiency she used when correcting an argument in class. Polite, elegant, unmistakable. And yet Nia noticed something else too. Sarah noticed everyone else, which meant she noticed Nia. Every stare, every delayed answer, every time Nia seemed to be looking at her a second too long. And worst of all, Sarah never embarrassed her for it. She only watched back. Not openly. Never openly. But with enough awareness to make Nia feel like she was standing in sunlight with no way to hide the fact that she was burning. The third week after the bar kiss, Nia finally did the thing she had been avoiding. She went to office hours. Not because she needed the help. That would have been a lie too obvious even for her. She went because she wanted another reason to be near Sarah without having to admit she wanted that. That was the awful thing about obsession. It teaches you how to lie to yourself in very polished language. So she showed up with her notebook in hand and a question she had technically already answered on her own the night before. Sarah's office was on the second floor of the Humanities building, tucked into a corridor that smelled faintly of old paper, tea, and wood polish. Her nameplate was small and clean. Her door was open just enough to suggest she was expecting someone, but not enough to invite every passerby. Nia stood outside it longer than she meant to. Then she knocked. "Come in." The voice was calm. Controlled. It always was. Nia stepped inside and closed the door behind her before she could change her mind. The room was exactly what she expected and still somehow more dangerous up close. Bookshelves. Neat stacks of papers. A desk arranged with the kind of precision that told you this woman did not allow chaos to live where she worked. Sarah sat behind that desk with a pen in one hand and a folder open in front of her. When she looked up and saw Nia, she did not look surprised. That was the first thing that irritated Nia. The second was that she looked entirely too composed about it. "Miss Hart," Sarah said, her voice even. "You're early." Nia hesitated. "I thought office hours started at 4. "They do. It's 3:48. Sarah glanced at the clock on her desk, then back at her. "So it is." That almost made Nia smile. Almost. It was the kind of small exchange that should have felt harmless. It didn't. Because there was something unbearably intimate about being in her office when the rest of the building was still busy and noisy and full of people who had no idea Nia was standing 10 feet away from the woman she had kissed in a bar and then spent 3 weeks trying not to think about. Sarah gestured toward the chair across from her. Nia sat. A beat of silence passed. Not uncomfortable. Not exactly. Just full. Sarah folded one hand over the other on the desk. "So," she said, "what do you need help with?" Nia had come prepared for this question. She had not prepared for the way Sarah asked it, like she was genuinely willing to answer academically, as if Nia's presence here was still just a student seeking support. That should have calmed her. Instead, it made her more aware of everything. The line of Sarah's jaw. The fall of her hair over one shoulder. The ring she still wore on her left hand. Nia's gaze caught on that ring before she could stop it. Sarah noticed, of course. Sarah noticed everything. Nia looked down at her notebook too late. "The third reading," she said, clearing her throat. "I'm not sure I fully understand the argument in section 2. Sarah's expression shifted slightly. Not much. Just enough to suggest she knew exactly how much Nia was lying. She reached for the copy of the reading sitting on the edge of her desk. "Section 2 is the easiest part," she said. Nia gave a helpless shrug. "Maybe I'm struggling for no reason. Maybe." There it was. That almost smile. Not enough to be called warmth, but enough to wreck a person who had not slept properly in weeks. Sarah began explaining the argument anyway. And the worst part was, she was excellent at it. Clear. Precise. Patient. She explained it the way she probably explained most things, as if she respected intelligence enough to speak plainly to it. Nia asked another question. Then another. And then one more, because she did not actually want to leave yet. Sarah answered each one. Without impatience. Without irritation. Without telling Nia she was wasting her time. That should not have made Nia feel as strange as it did. Because Sarah was letting her stay. Not lingering in a way that was sloppy or careless. No, letting her stay in a way that was deliberate. Controlled. Like she had decided, for reasons Nia could not yet name, that she did not mind the interruption. And that was how Nia learned the first dangerous thing about office hours. The door was closed, but Sarah did not rush to send her away. At some point, the conversation drifted from the reading to the paper. Then from the paper to class participation. Then from class participation to a question that had nothing to do with the course at all. Nia asked it before she could stop herself. Do a lot of people come here with questions they already know the answer to? Sarah looked at her in a way that made the office feel 1 degree quieter. Sometimes, she said. Nia held her gaze. Do you mind? Sarah rested her elbow lightly on the desk and tilted her head. That depends, she said. On why they're asking. Nia's heartbeat stumbled. She had walked right into that one. She looked away first. Because it was easier than explaining that she had come here to be near Sarah and hated herself a little for how much better that felt than studying alone. Sarah's fingers tapped once against the folder in front of her. Then, calmly, you don't usually ask questions this obvious. Nia glanced back up. What does that mean? It means, Sarah said, you're usually better at hiding what you're doing. That landed harder than Nia wanted it to. Because it was true. Nia opened her mouth, then closed it again. Sarah watched her with that maddening stillness of hers. Not waiting to ambush her. Just waiting. And, because Nia was apparently a fool, she asked the question that had been moving around in her chest all week. Do you do this with everyone who comes to office hours? Sarah blinked once. Do what? Let them stay. The room went quiet again. Too quiet. Sarah leaned back slightly in her chair. No, she said after a moment. The answer was simple. That was what made it dangerous. Nia's throat tightened. Why me then? The words came out softer than she intended. Sarah did not answer immediately. That was the problem with her. She never gave you anything before she had weighed the shape of it. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but lower than before. Because you ask questions as though the answers matter. Nia looked at her. That should have been enough. It should have been polite. Professional. Safe. Instead it felt like a hand had been placed somewhere near her pulse. Sarah continued, and, because you have a habit of looking at me like you're trying to solve something. Nia's face warmed. I'm not. Sarah's expression changed again. Just a fraction. A slight narrowing of the eyes. A quiet challenge. No, Nia could have lied. She should have lied. Instead, she said, maybe I'm trying to understand why you remember everything. Sarah's gaze held hers. For a second too long. And then, very softly, I remember what I need to. That sentence sat between them for a long moment. Nia did not know what to do with it. Sarah did not help. Instead, she looked down at the reading on her desk and said, in the same even tone she used in class, did you need anything else? The way she said it made Nia realize the conversation had ended before she was ready for it to. And that, too, was part of the problem. Because Sarah always knew exactly when to let things hang unresolved. Nia rose a little too quickly from the chair. No, she said. Then, because she could not help herself, she added, I think that was enough. Sarah looked up at that. Something flickered in her face. Not a smile. Never quite a smile. But close enough to be dangerous. Nia took one step toward the door before she stopped. Then turned back. Professor? Sarah lifted her eyes. Nia hesitated, suddenly aware of how much she wanted to ask something reckless. Instead, she chose the one thing she knew she could say safely. Do you ever get tired of people trying to make conversation with you when they don't mean it? The question landed with a strange stillness. Sarah's face softened by the smallest degree. Not into warmth. Into recognition. Yes, she said. The honesty of that answer made Nia's chest ache. Nia nodded once and reached for the door. But before she could open it, Sarah spoke again. Miss Hart. Nia turned. Sarah's posture had not changed. But something in her eyes had. You can come back if you genuinely have another question, she said. Nia swallowed. It should have sounded like an invitation to study. It did not. It sounded like permission to return. And that was much more dangerous. Yes, Professor, Nia said. She left the office with her heart beating too fast and her notebook still open to the same page she had already understood before she arrived. Outside, the hallway felt colder. Not because the office had been warm. Because staying in it had made Nia aware of something she was now too afraid to name. Sarah had not asked her to leave quickly. She had let her stay. And that was the first crack in the wall. Later that week, Nia would realize she had begun measuring her days by office hours. By how long she could wait before finding an excuse to go back. By the way Sarah's voice changed when she said her name. By the impossible fact that she never looked irritated to see her. Only aware. Always aware. And that awareness, more than anything else, was what made Nia's obsession deepen into something she no longer knew how to manage. By the fourth week, Nia had developed a dangerous habit. She started looking for Sarah everywhere. Not in a frantic way. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to be embarrassing if anyone had known. She looked for her in the corridors between classes. She looked for her from the library window when the humanities building lights came on late in the evening. She looked for her whenever a woman with dark hair walked too gracefully down the hall. She hated herself for it. And she hated Sarah for making the looking feel inevitable. The worst part was that Sarah did not make it easier by acting distant. If anything, she made it worse by continuing to be exactly what she had always been. Controlled. Beautiful. Inaccessible in a way that made every small kindness feel deliberate. She never chased Nia out of office hours. Never seemed irritated when Nia came with the kind of question she already knew the answer to. Never behaved like she was bothered by the attention, even when Nia could feel it in her own bones that she absolutely should have been. That kind of calm was exhausting to be around. It made Nia feel like the unstable one. Like the one who was losing ground. And then one Thursday afternoon, while walking out of a seminar with Tammy, she heard two girls from another class talking behind them. "You saw her, right?" "Of course I saw her." "The woman in Professor Vale's office?" "Exactly." "Stunning." Nia slowed before she meant to. Tammy noticed immediately. "What?" she asked. Nia did not answer right away. She could hear them still, those two girls, their voices low but excited in the particular way people get when they're talking about a woman too beautiful to ignore and too impossible to approach. She was sitting there like they already knew each other, one of them said. "Who?" "Professor Vale and the woman." "What woman?" "The one in the office. Tall. Elegant. Looked like she'd stepped out of a perfume ad." Nia felt the sentence go through her like a blade. Tammy glanced at her. "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "That thing where you stop walking like you're trying not to hear something." Nia kept her eyes forward. "I'm not doing anything." Tammy gave her a long, knowing look. "You are so gone," she muttered. Nia didn't answer. Because the truth was worse than gone. She was curious. Curious enough that the next day, she found herself at office hours with a question she had no real need to ask. That was the humiliating part about obsession. It starts making excuses for itself. Sarah's office door was open when she arrived. The corridor outside was quiet. The building had that late afternoon stillness that made every sound feel too important. Nia knocked anyway. "Come in." She stepped inside. And stopped. Sarah was behind her desk, but she was not alone. The woman from the rumors was there. Tall. Stunning. Dark hair falling in loose waves over one shoulder. A fitted coat draped over the back of the chair. She had one hand on the armrest of Sarah's chair, the other resting lightly on the edge of the desk. Her posture was too familiar. Too certain. Too close. Nia's stomach dropped so hard it almost made her dizzy. Sarah was seated, one leg crossed over the other, hands folded calmly in her lap. The woman leaned toward her as if they were in the middle of a private conversation and had only paused because the room had interrupted them. Her mouth was parted slightly, like she had just been speaking, or like she had just said something too intimate to finish aloud. Sarah's face, for all its usual calm, looked different. Not soft. Never soft. But occupied. Present in a way that made Nia feel like she had just walked into a place she was not supposed to be. Sarah looked up first. Her eyes found Nia. And for 1 second, the room became impossible. Nia did not know what the expression in Sarah's face meant, only that it changed the moment she saw her there. Surprise, yes. But something else too. A brief tightening. A flicker that vanished so fast Nia almost told herself she imagined it. The woman beside Sarah also turned. Her expression sharpened with polite curiosity, then lifted into a smile that was too practiced to be innocent. Nia recognized that smile instantly. It was the smile of someone who already knew exactly how much history lived in a room. Nia should have spoken. Should have said the question she came for. Should have remained standing there like a normal student with normal office hour needs. Instead, she felt the whole thing hit her at once. The hand on the desk. The way the woman was bent toward Sarah. The fact that Sarah had not moved away. It all landed too hard, too fast. Nia stepped back before anyone could stop her. "I'm sorry," she said. Sarah's head lifted. "Nia." But Nia was already gone. She did not remember walking out. Only the sensation of the hallway closing around her like the building itself had noticed what she had seen and was now trying to pretend it had not happened. She made it halfway down the corridor before she had to stop. She stood there, one hand braced against the wall, breathing too carefully so that she would not make a sound. Because if she made a sound, she might do something humiliating. Like cry. Or go back. Or demand to know who the woman was and why she looked like she had every right to stand that close to Sarah Vale. Tammy caught up to her moments later, alarm already in her face. What happened? Nia shook her head. Nothing. Tammy stared at her for a second, then followed her gaze back toward the office door. "Oh," she said quietly. Nia looked away immediately. Tammy's voice softened. "That was the woman from the rumor, wasn't it?" Nia did not answer. That was answer enough. Tammy folded her arms, studying her carefully. "You really should stop falling in love with emotionally unavailable women." Nia laughed once, sharply. "Is that your professional advice?" "It's my best advice." Nia stared down the corridor. It looked like she belonged there. Tammy looked at her. "That's because she probably does," she said carefully. "At least in whatever version of this you've created in your head." Nia wanted to argue. She didn't. Because the worst part was that the image had already burned itself into her. Sarah's chair. The woman beside her. The space between them that did not feel like space at all. And the way Sarah had looked in that moment, not flustered, not distant, but like the room had contained a history Nia had not been invited into. That was enough. More than enough. Nia had seen enough to make the wrong assumptions. Or maybe the right ones. And either possibility hurt. Inside the office, the conversation had already gone quiet. When the door had shut behind Nia, Sarah's composure had gone taut. The woman across from her straightened slowly, as if she had noticed the shift and was watching to see whether it would matter. It did. More than Sarah wanted it to. She rested one hand against the edge of the desk, then looked at the woman with a calmness that was starting to feel brittle. "You could have waited until later," Sarah said. The woman gave a soft laugh. "You say that like I haven't been waiting for weeks." Sarah's jaw flexed. "That's not what I meant." "No," the woman replied, "because I thought it was exactly what you meant." Sarah leaned back slightly in her chair, folding one hand over the other to keep from doing something more revealing with them. "Camille," she said, in a tone that would have sounded completely neutral to anyone who didn't know her well, "you didn't need to come here." Camille's smile thinned. "No, I didn't need to," she said. "But I wanted to." Sarah looked away first, just slightly. Camille noticed. "Of course she did." "You still do that," Camille said, her voice dipping. "You still act like if you keep your face still enough, nothing can touch you." Sarah's eyes came back to her. "Did you come here to criticize my posture?" Camille laughed again, but this time it had an edge to it. "No," she said. "I came because you haven't replied to a single one of my messages in 2 weeks, and you keep acting like I'm a stranger when I'm standing in front of you." Sarah said nothing. Camille held her gaze and added, quieter now, "You promised me that even if we broke up, you would not stop talking to me." The words landed. Sarah didn't move. Camille continued, because once she had started, the hurt in her had too much momentum to stop. "You didn't block me," she said. "So I kept calling. I kept texting. I thought maybe you were busy at first. Then I thought maybe you were angry. But now it's been long enough that I have to ask, are you ignoring me on purpose? Sarah exhaled slowly. I have been busy, she said. Camille gave her a look that was almost amused in its disbelief. Busy, she repeated. That's your answer? Sarah did not rise to it. Instead, she said, you know I'm not good at staying close once something ends. Camille's face changed. That hurt too. Because it was true. And because truth had never been enough to stop it from being cruel. You used to make time for me, Camille said, her voice tighter now. You used to answer. You used to call me back. You used to wear your AirPods in the lecture hall, so I could hear your voice when I was sick and couldn't get out of bed. Sarah looked down at her hands. Camille saw that and continued, softer but more wounded for it. You used to make me feel like I wasn't alone, she said. And now you look at me like I'm something you've already moved out of your life. Sarah's expression didn't break. But something in the room did. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower than before. I cared about you, she said. I did care. Camille's mouth parted slightly. And? Sarah held her gaze. And I am no longer your girlfriend. The sentence sat there, cold and clean. Then Sarah continued, you do not get to speak to me as though nothing changed. You do not get to stand in my office and ask for the version of me that existed before we ended. Camille's eyes flashed. That's not fair. Sarah's response came instantly, almost gently. No, she said. It isn't. The honesty of that seemed to wound them both. Camille looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, with a frustration that had too much love still inside it to be easy, you could at least answer me. Sarah's face did not soften. But her voice did. I am answering you now. Camille let out a breath that sounded like a laugh only if someone had never been broken before. And then the room went quiet again. Not peaceful. Just finished. By the time Sarah left her office that evening, Nia was long gone. But the image of her face in the doorway stayed. Too pale. Too controlled. Too quick to disappear. Sarah stood by the desk for a moment after Camille left, staring at the closed door as if the exchange had left a mark she could not immediately organize. Camille had hurt her, yes. But not in the simple way people expected when two women had ended a relationship and one of them was still lingering at the threshold. It was more complicated than that. Because Camille was not wrong. Sarah had cared. Sarah had loved her. And now she was being forced to stand in the aftermath of that love without the protective distance she preferred. The office felt too quiet. Then, finally, Sarah opened her phone. There were messages from Camille. Messages from the week before. Messages from the week before that. She had not answered any of them. Not because she didn't see them. Because seeing them and replying were two different kinds of honesty. And lately, honesty had become inconvenient. She turned the phone face down on the desk. Then her gaze drifted, almost against her will, toward the door where Nia had stood. That had not gone the way she wanted. Not at all. She had seen the girl's face. Seen the hurt hit it. Seen the speed with which she had left. And beneath the annoyance, beneath the guilt, beneath the stubborn desire to keep things controlled, a new feeling had begun to rise. Not confusion. Awareness. Nia was no longer just the girl from the bar. She was becoming the girl who watched. The girl who noticed. The girl who was beginning to understand the shape of Sarah's life in ways Sarah was not yet prepared to deal with. And Sarah, for the first time, felt the strange unease of being observed by someone who cared too much to lie to herself. That night, Nia went home and tried not to think about the office. She failed. She thought about the way the woman had stood too close to Sarah. She thought about the hand on the chair. The hand on the desk. The impossible familiarity of it. She thought about the look in the woman's face, not curiosity, not politeness, but the confidence of someone who had already been let in. And most of all, she thought about how Sarah had looked sitting there. Not startled. Not defensive. Not like someone trapped. Like someone with history. Nia did not know who the woman was. She did not know what had passed between them. She had not stayed to hear a word. But she had seen enough. Enough to go home feeling like she had lost something she had never actually been given. Enough to understand that whatever she was feeling for Sarah Vale had now crossed into the ugliest part of longing. The part where someone else's presence can ruin your whole night. She lay awake longer than she wanted to, replaying the image over and over again. By morning, the jealousy had settled into something colder. Not a burst, a habit. And habits, Nia would learn, are far harder to break than feelings. By the time festival week arrived, Nia was already tired in the way only longing can make you tired. Not physically. Not the kind of tired that came from too little sleep or too many assignments. This was different. This was the exhaustion of carrying a feeling you could not set down without making a fool of yourself. After the office scene, after the glimpse of Camille, after the way Sarah had looked sitting there like someone with history too close to her skin, Nia had spent the rest of the week in a state of quiet damage. She still went to class. She still took notes. She still answered when called on. But something in her had gone colder. Not enough to stop staring. Just enough to make the staring hurt. And Sarah noticed. Of course she did. That was the worst part about being watched by a woman like Dr. Sarah Vale. She noticed things other people would have missed. The hesitation in a student's answer. The way someone's attention drifted. The way Nia's eyes were no longer restless in the usual way, but sharp, quiet, and wounded. Sarah said nothing. She never said anything too quickly. But Nia could feel her attention anyway. It was there in the pauses between sentences. It was there in the way Sarah's gaze swept the room and returned, just once too often, to the third row. It was there in the way she could be standing at the front of the lecture hall, calm and composed as ever, and still somehow make Nia feel like she was standing in the middle of a conversation that was never spoken aloud. Did you really think I was going to stop here? Tell me, do you already want part 2 of Sarah and Nia, or should I leave you hanging like this? Because as your virtual girlfriend, my job is simple. To make you happy, to keep you company, and to leave you feeling just a little too attached to my voice. If you want part 2, that means you have to stay close. Hit subscribe right now, turn on your notifications, and don't go too far. Because by tomorrow, the next episode will be out, and I don't want you to miss a single second of it. Now be honest. Is it hot in here, or is that just how I feel about you?